Welcome back to GraveyardDance.com. Over the past year or two, we've covered some pretty strange stories that range between true crime, dark history, and all kinds of bizarre unsolved cases. Today's story, when you first start listening to it, may sound like your typical true crime story that you may hear on any number of true crime podcasts or true crime television shows. But trust me when I say, this one is a bit different. When someone is murdered, we often wish we could ask the dead who did it to them. This is one of those rare cases when the dead may have just answered back. Before we get there, though, let's take a moment to talk about something happier, and that is saving animals. More the proper phrase would be adopting animals, but let's not digress over simple terms. At eyesofadog.com, you'll find rescues and shelters in all 50 states where you can go and adopt a dog or cat who would gladly sit on your lap while you're enjoying these creepy, spooky videos. If you're not ready to adopt, or you simply can't because your apartment manager or landlord says no, you can still help by simply sharing Eyes of a Dog. Tell your friends, your family, your coworkers. If you're a radio DJ, mention it on air. If you're a pastor, mention it at the end of your services. You can even share it with any number of social medias like Facebook, X, Rumble, Instagram, or any that you choose to use. It just takes a moment to help save a pet who needs your help. Now, let's grab a snack, a drink, and your favorite person or pet to cuddle with and listen to the strange, dark, and bizarre case of the deaths of Harry and Nicola Fuller. On the morning of Wednesday, February 10th, 1993, a call was received by the United Kingdom's emergency service helpline when the operator picked up the line. They were greeted with sounds of squealing followed by muffled voices. It appeared to be a child either playing a prank or mistakenly dialing the number. The operator inquired if Mummy was present. During this exchange, they could hear someone moving around in a room, seemingly rummaging through drawers and cupboards. This activity persisted for 6 minutes. Eventually, the operator recorded in their system that there was a child on the line and subsequently terminated the call. Although standard protocol required that such calls be forwarded to the police for further investigation, no additional action was taken. Later that same morning, Barbara Johnson made a call to her daughter's home phone number. She felt her frustration mounting as she encountered the busy signal, which she had already gotten several times already. After waiting a few minutes, Barbara attempted to call again, but the line was still busy. Concern began to creep in. She shared a close bond with her 27-year-old daughter, Nicola Fuller, and they communicated almost daily. However, Barbara had not heard from Nicola since Sunday. Since 8:45 a.m., she had been trying to reach her, but nearly half an hour had passed without success. At 9:15 a.m., Barbara decided to contact Nicola at her workplace instead. Nicola worked part-time as a sales assistant at a shopping center located not far from their home in the British market town of Wadhurst in East Sussex. Unfortunately, she was informed that Nicola had not reported for work that day. Although Barbara tried to remain calm, her instincts told her that something was amiss. It was highly unusual for Nicola to go 3 days without contacting her parents. Throughout the day, Nicola's home phone remained busy. By the afternoon, Barbara and her husband resolved to visit their daughter's home to find out what might be happening. Nicola resided with her husband Harry on High Street in Woodhurst. The newly married couple had recently leased a spacious cottage. This delightful old home was painted a bright white, complemented by a black roof and a modest front garden. The front windows provided a view of the historic Main Street and the nearby shops. Guests were greeted by a plaque featuring 2 owls, embodying the essence of a classic English cottage nestled in an idyllic English village with a population of just a few thousand residents. At the back of the cottage, there was an expansive parking area that served both the local shops and the adjacent high school. Both Nicola and Harry's vehicles were parked there. Barbara Johnson and her husband Michael looked through the back door of the cottage, noticing their daughter's purse and keys laying on a nearby table. They knocked but received no response. Concern began to envelop the Johnsons, prompting them to contact the police for a welfare check. Officers arrived shortly before 6 p.m. Nicola's parents followed the police to the front of their residence, where an unsettling silence enveloped the scene. The curtains were drawn tightly, and the front door was securely locked. With no other options available, the police were compelled to force entry. Upon entering, everything seemed orderly. There were no indications of a break-in or any signs of a struggle. However, as the officers proceeded from the living room towards the kitchen, they observed something protruding from the entrance of an adjacent utility room, a pair of legs. Inside that utility room lay 45-year-old Harry Fuller, sprawled on the floor. Police there were shocked to find a gruesome scene. In a pool of blood, his body had been propped up against the washing machine, his face covered by a coat. He'd been fatally shot in the back with a single bullet through his heart. The authorities made their way upstairs. On the first floor, there was a trail of blood leading them past the fallen coffee cup and ashtray into Harry and Nicola's bedroom, where a blood-soaked quilt lay on the floor. Underneath was the body of Nicola Fuller. She'd been shot 4 times, once in the shoulder and 3 times in the face. One of the bullets had nearly blown the bottom of her jaw completely off. Nicola's parents were quickly rushed away from the scene to keep them from seeing the horror that was inside the cottage. Nicola and Harry had been married for just 5 months. They first crossed paths in June of the previous year and instantly connected, despite being an unconventional couple. Harry was 18 years older than Nicola and had a personality that starkly contrasted with hers. While she was notably reserved and introverted, he was lively and charming. Nicola preferred to keep a low profile, whereas Harry took pleasure in showcasing the luxurious aspects of life. Employed as a car dealer, he delighted in displaying his high-end vehicles, including a Rolls-Royce and a Range Rover. Nevertheless, their differences complemented each other beautifully, leading them to fall deeply in love within just 2 months of meeting. They soon became engaged, and their wedding was a simple yet meaningful event. The couple exchanged vows at a local registry office in Tunbridge Wells before having their marriage blessed by a reverend at St. Mark's Church. Although Nicola's family expressed concerns about the rapid pace of their relationship, she remained resolute in her decision to settle down. He treated her with great care and was extremely protective of her. In the end, they embraced Harry as a member of their family wholeheartedly. As the cottage was secured, investigators worked diligently to reconstruct the unfortunate events that had unfolded within its walls. It was soon determined that the murders had taken place earlier that same morning. On the night of Tuesday, February 9th, Nicola had gone out for dinner with friends, and Harry picked her up around 11 p.m. None of Nicola's friends observed anything out of the ordinary regarding the couple's demeanor. Both Nicola and Harry appeared to be in high spirits and enthusiastically discussed a trip they were about to enjoy together in the Canary Islands. Plans had been made for the upcoming week. A few doors away from the cottage was a shop that sold tobacco and newspapers. On the morning of the murders, the clerk remembered that Harry Fuller entered the shop shortly after 8:30 a.m. to buy cigarettes and a newspaper. Nicola's mother, Barbara, attempted to call the Fullers' residence around 8:45 a.m., but found the line busy. The owners of the tea shop adjacent to the cottage recalled hearing 3 or 4 loud bangs around 9 a.m. They assumed it was merely the Fullers knocking on the wall to request that they lower their radio volume. Consequently, investigators concluded that the shootings occurred sometime between 8:35 and 9 a.m. Harry had sustained gunshot wounds in the kitchen, after which his body was dragged to a nearby utility room. Given that he had been shot in the back and there were no indications of a struggle, it is probable that he was shot first. A white powder had been scattered across his chest, and beside him lay a small plastic bag containing the same unusual substance. Meanwhile, Nicola was on the staircase of the first floor, enjoying a coffee and cigarette when the assailant began firing. She was still dressed in her bathrobe and holding a towel, likely en route to take a shower. Forensic investigators concluded that Nicola was initially shot in the shoulder from behind. Upon turning to confront her attacker, she was then struck by bullets in her forehead and left cheek. These 2 shots caused severe damage to her eye and fractured her skull beneath her jaw. Despite being gravely injured, Nicola managed to crawl toward her bedroom. It is likely that the killer heard her movements, indicating she was still alive. Since no cause of death had been reported by emergency services, it seemed that the shooter had taken her life before she had an opportunity to react. Both Harry and Nicola were shot at close range. A cartridge case from a Hurtenberger brand was discovered outside the utility room, and a ballistic expert concluded that it had been discharged from a .32 caliber Walther PPK self-loading pistol. Aside from this, the perpetrator left very few traces behind. An investigation of the Fullers' residence did not reveal any significant findings. There were no signs of ransacking or theft, leading one investigator to assert that whoever killed them did so in cold blood. Hurst's High Street was a bustling thoroughfare linking East Sussex and Kent, featuring several restaurants, 2 banks, a butcher shop, and various other retail establishments. During the critical time frame between 8:35 and 9 a.m., no one reported anything particularly unusual. The police set up a command center on High Street and established a tip line to encourage any witnesses to come forward. As was typical, the road remained quiet before the morning rush began. Consequently, the postman was caught off guard when a car emerged from behind the Fuller's house and pulled out directly in front of him. The vehicle was a blue Ford Escort, and at the wheel was a robust male driver estimated to be between 35 and 40 years old. The Escort then proceeded north along Main Street until it vanished from view. A little more than 30 minutes later, at 7:05 a.m., a passerby on High Street observed 2 tall men dressed smartly exiting a cream-colored Ford Sierra. They proceeded along the path towards the cottage, but no one witnessed their departure. Just before 8 a.m., a woman walking behind the cottage noticed a black vehicle enter the parking lot. It had an elongated hood reminiscent of a Jaguar. A man in a long black coat emerged from the car, but she did not see where he went afterward. Across High Street was Lloyd's Bank, which had a security camera directed towards the tobacconist. The footage verified that Harry Fuller entered the tobacconist alone at 8:34 a.m. and left just minutes later without appearing to be followed. No other suspicious activity was recorded on the tape. However, it was confirmed that a Jaguar XJS was present in the vicinity. Additionally, around 9 a.m., a schoolgirl passed by the cottage. The police were informed by her that she heard a door slam, and shortly after, someone collided with her. When she glanced up, she noticed another man standing near the cottage entrance. Given this information, along with reports of 2 men exiting a Ford Sierra, the police began to entertain the theory that there might be 2 assailants involved. However, the schoolgirl was with a friend who had a differing account. Shay indicated that these incidents had taken place on separate days instead of at the same time. The community was taken aback by the news of the murders. Wadhurst, known for its tranquility and safety, left residents in disbelief that a couple who appeared to be ordinary could fall victim to such a dreadful act. Although Harry and Nicola were relatively newcomers to the neighborhood and tended to keep a low profile, there was nothing about them that seemed suspicious until law enforcement began investigating Harry's past, revealing an entirely different narrative. Harry Fuller had not excelled academically. His dyslexia posed challenges in reading and writing. However, he excelled in other areas. He possessed excellent verbal communication skills, was adept with his hands, and had a keen sense for identifying good deals. To his advantage, he had prior experience in the building and roofing industry before transitioning into car sales. He frequently attended auctions and built a network that enabled him to purchase used cars, which he could then sell for a profit. This business venture proved beneficial for him. However, he faced a challenge in finding adequate storage space for the vehicles. When the cottage became available, Harry was thrilled because it provided him access to a spacious car park located at the back of the property. Despite his excitement, he appeared to have reservations about making the move. Neighbors observed that he would not open the front door without first peering out the window, and he only welcomed individuals he recognized. It's possible that his behavior stemmed from being excessively cautious. The majority of Harry's financial dealings were conducted in cash, and he was quite ostentatious about it. Friends and associates noted that Harry didn't even carry a wallet. Instead, he opted for briefcases and stacks of cash. Given the white powder found scattered on Harry's body, it was reasonable to suspect that the murders might be linked to drug activities. Investigators entertained the theory that Harry's car business could have been a cover for an illicit cocaine operation. Some of his business partners had dubious backgrounds, with one rumored to have served time for manslaughter. Additionally, Harry himself had a history of legal troubles, including previous convictions for fraud and burglary. Those familiar with him often described him as a swindler. He was known for being a braggart who tended to embellish his stories, especially regarding his financial status. Former neighbors accused Harry of deceiving them into parting with their money by offering what appeared to be complimentary repairs on their homes, only to later impose exorbitant charges for those services. Harry had expressed his apprehensions about his past to a business associate, indicating that he feared certain individuals might feel the need to locate him. It soon became evident that Harry was experiencing paranoia regarding something specific. The Fullers had only resided in Black Men's Cottage for 5 months, yet police found that Harry had already altered their phone number 3 times during that span, with the latest change occurring just a week prior to the murders. Given the absence of any indications of a break-in, the police were convinced that Harry likely knew his assailant and had allowed them entry into his home. The white powder discovered on Harry's body was subjected to testing, revealing that it was not cocaine but rather sugar. With no additional evidence to support the drug theory, it was swiftly dismissed. However, the presence of sugar offered a significant clue. It suggested that the individual responsible for the murders of the Fullers had likely planned the crime in advance, using the sugar as a misleading element just prior to committing the act. Not long before his death, Harry had purchased a BMW from another dealership with the intention of reselling it. Upon inspection, he realized that both the engine and license plates had been altered, clear indicators that the vehicle was stolen. Outraged by this discovery, Harry reported the theft to law enforcement, which ultimately led to the exposure of a car theft ring. Consequently, some of Harry's business associates suffered financial losses due to this operation, leaving them dissatisfied. This decision to report the theft would later have dire repercussions for Harry. Just 5 days prior to his death, Harry informed an officer that one of his disgruntled associates, Roger Lee, had begun to suspect him of being the informant and was causing him trouble. Roger Lee was known as a car dealer and a reputed gangster with a tendency towards violence and cocaine use. He was infamous for carrying a shotgun, which he would brandish to intimidate others. Additionally, he drove a Jaguar XJS, similar to the one seen in the security footage from Lloyd's Bank. Investigators contemplated the possibility that Roger Lee might have visited the Fullers' residence to exact revenge on Harry. They managed to locate him at a caravan situated approximately 20 miles from Whitehurst. However, Lee was uncooperative and declined to respond to any inquiries. He quickly emerged as the primary suspect in the case. Nevertheless, due to the lack of evidence linking him to the crimes, law enforcement had no basis for making an arrest. Notices requesting information were posted at the car auction locations that Harry frequented, but shortly after the murders, investigators began to consider an entirely different angle. Although Harry and Nicola seemed to have a happy marriage, past behaviors indicated that infidelity could be a contributing factor. This was not Harry's first marriage. He had recently divorced and had a 3-year-old daughter with his ex-wife. Furthermore, there were verified accounts of a third unsuccessful marriage. It appears that Harry had developed quite a reputation as a womanizer. Could this have been connected to the motive for his murder? Nicola's father, Michael, referred to his daughter as an English rose, emphasizing that she would never intentionally harm anyone and would have been utterly heartbroken by the situation. The police investigated the possibility that Harry and Nicola might have been victims of a contract killing, pondering whether a vengeful business associate had hired someone to eliminate Harry, with Nicola tragically caught in the crossfire. Alternatively, they considered if a spurned lover sought revenge on an unfaithful partner. The lead investigator shared these theories with the media. The nature of the killing suggests that the possibility of a professional assassin being involved cannot be dismissed. The perpetrator displayed a ruthless approach in carrying out the crime. Harry's family avoided media attention, but on February 15th, 5 days after the murders, Nicola's parents, Michael and Barbara Johnson, held a press conference urging anyone with information to step forward. Barbara wept quietly as Michael struggled to articulate his thoughts, his voice trembling as he stated that whoever took Harry's life had killed an innocent witness. Both families are utterly heartbroken. He pleaded for people to come forward and trust the police, asserting that there was no reason for fear. Meanwhile, authorities retrieved Roger Lee's mobile phone records from the morning of Wednesday, February 10, 1993. Data stated that he was far from Woodhurst at the time. What initially appeared to be a promising lead turned out to be yet another in a series of misleading clues. Blackman's cottage transformed into an impromptu memorial as grieving relatives and stunned community members came to lay flowers at the doorstep. Meanwhile, the search for evidence continued inside, with police particularly focused on discovering where Harry had hidden his money. Harry had recently entered into a business arrangement with one of his neighbors, who informed the police that just 10 days prior to the murders, she had given Harry £13,000 in cash, most of which was in £20 notes. The plan was straightforward. Harry would purchase cars with the money, and they would share the profits equally. A reward of £10,000 for information was announced, yet the enigmatic Steve remained quiet. The truth was that despite Harry Fuller being well-liked, he had many adversaries. The numerous investigative avenues made it challenging to determine the correct one. Although the police had plenty of leads, 3 weeks went by without any significant breakthroughs. They sent a letter to every household in Woodhurst updating them on the case and renewing their request for information. Then, one investigator had a thought. He picked up the telephone found next to Nicola Fuller's body and pressed the redial button. It might lead them to Steve or another important individual that Harry or Nicola had communicated with before the crime. The response on the other end of the line caught him off guard. Emergency services? There was no record of a 999 emergency call made from the cottage, and neither police nor paramedics had been called to the residence on the morning when Harry and Nicola were murdered. Investigators now understood that Nicola may have indeed managed to call for assistance. They acquired a recording of the calls received at 999 on Wednesday, February 10, 1993. At 8:34 a.m., a call was made from the cottage. The caller did not speak and only emitted squealing noises into the receiver. The emergency services operator interpreted these sounds as a child playing and subsequently disconnected the call. However, the police later realized that the muffled cries were actually from Nicola Fuller. The gunshot to her head that had fractured her jaw also cut her tongue. She was attempting to ask the operator for assistance, but couldn't articulate her words clearly. While she was still on the line with the operator, the assailant covered Nicola's head with a quilt and delivered the final lethal shot. Unaware that the call had connected, the killer continued to move around the house, opening and closing drawers. When Nicola's family learned of this, they were devastated. The Woodhurst police station was approximately 200 yards from the cottage, and they believed that if Nicola Cole had been connected to the police, she might have been rescued, or at least the perpetrator could have been apprehended in the act. Nicola's parents met with British Telecom, the company responsible for managing the calls, seeking an explanation and a public apology. However, their request was refused. By April 1993, 2 months had elapsed since the double homicide, and the police were no closer to making an arrest. They determined it was time to disclose all available information. A segment about the case was featured on Crime Watch, a well-known BBC television program that reconstructs significant unsolved crimes. During this segment, the police shared an edited audio clip of Harry Fuller conversing with the elusive Steve, with Steve's name omitted. A detective involved in the investigation informed the audience that it is essential to locate this individual, as he has not been found and has not come forward. There may be reasons for his absence, but it is imperative that we identify him. I urge anyone listening tonight who recognizes or thinks they recognize his voice to reach out to us. Additionally, if the individual in question is listening and wishes to contact us to clear his name, we encourage him to do so. A woman named Sheila was at home watching the segment when she thought she recognized the voice as her brother-in-law, Steve Young, but she wasn't certain. Sheila chose to think it over, and the next day, she called Steve Young to inquire if he had talked to Harry Fuller the night before the murders. Steve replied that he had not. Sheila was perplexed. The voice had sounded so much like him that she urged her brother-in-law to reach out to the police just to clear himself from the investigation. Steve Young was Harry's insurance broker, and although they had known each other since the early 1980s, they had lost contact over time. They had only recently reconnected and established a business relationship about 2 weeks into the inquiry regarding the Fuller murder. The police had questioned Steve Young as part of their standard investigation into Harry's business affairs. Steve stated that their relationship was strictly professional and that they did not share a friendship outside of work. They last communicated approximately 5 days prior to the murders when Harry contacted Steve to talk about an expiring cover note. Steve asserted that he was in his office on the morning of Wednesday, February 10, 1993, and that his secretary could confirm his location. There was nothing about him that raised the suspicions of the police, so he wasn't investigated further. However, Sheila wasn't the only one who recognized the voice. At the same time, an anonymous male called the police tip line and claimed that the voice belonged to Steve Young. 2 days after the Crywatch episode aired, 2 officers were sent to interview Steve Young at his office. Before they could do so, they received a call back. Young had just entered the Sussex police station and identified himself as the caller featured on the TV program. He also provided police with a 2-page statement in which he confessed to initially deceiving the interviewing officers. Young explained that one of his clients wanted to sell a Porsche, and he informed Harry Fuller about it, who expressed interest in seeing the car. On the evening of Tuesday, February 9th, Young called Harry to schedule an inspection for 8 a.m. the next day. However, as Young was heading toward Hearst the following morning, he was unexpectedly delayed by roadworks. By the time he reached the cottage, it was around 8:20 a.m., and seeing the drawn curtains led him to believe that the Fullers were still asleep. Young stated that he knocked on the door, but there was no response. He then strolled down High Street to pass the time before returning to the cottage around 8:40 a.m. The curtains remained closed, and once again, his knocks went unanswered. Steve Young insisted that he had not seen or heard anything unusual at the property. He was taken aback when he learned that Harry and Nicola had been murdered. He stated that he had reached out to the police to inquire if they wished to question him, but his call was never returned. Consequently, he assumed that his statement was not of interest. By the time the police came to see him as part of their standard questioning, he had already learned about Harry's questionable business activities. Young admitted that he fabricated his location on the day of the murders due to concerns for his own safety. For the investigators, there were no indications from Steve Young that raised any suspicions. In his mid-30s, this married father of 2 was a well-educated, law-abiding citizen with no criminal history. He was regarded as a devoted husband and supportive parent, serving as a cornerstone of the community. He actively participated in managing his son's under-11 football team and was deeply involved in the local drama club. Just a few months prior, he had captivated audiences with his comedic talent during the village's Christmas pantomime. He earned respect from both the community and his clients. This quickly turned out to be a significant understatement. Steve Young was heavily in debt. He had inherited his house from his father, but had subsequently taken out multiple mortgages that were overdue. His insurance brokerage was operating insolvently and had not made a profit in 8 years. Rather than using his clients' funds to cover their insurance premiums, Young was diverting that money to settle his own debts. With no remaining funds to pay the insurance companies, his brokerage faced the risk of closure. His financial condition was considered dire, with Young owing over £100,000 to various friends, family members, and businesses. The provincial insurance company was one of the businesses to which Young owed £13,500 in overdue premiums. Police found that just 2 days before Harry and Nicola were murdered, a representative from the provincial company contacted Young. He informed Young that he would visit his office on Wednesday, February 10th, to collect the outstanding debt and warned that if payment was not made, they would cease doing business with him. The meeting occurred as scheduled, and Young provided a check for £6,000, which was successfully processed. The police found that Young maintained a meticulous record of all the individuals from whom he borrowed money, but there was no indication of him having borrowed a significant amount prior to this meeting. This led to the pressing question, where did he acquire his funds? A review of Steve Young's bank statements revealed that he deposited £6,000 into his business account on the morning of Wednesday, February 10th, shortly after Harry and Nicola were murdered. The deposit was made in £20 notes, similar to the unexplained payment that Harry Fuller had received from his neighbor. Additionally, Young had settled an outstanding phone bill of £360. The police inquired about the source of Young's cash, to which he replied that a friend had given it to him 2 years prior, and he had kept it for emergencies. Meanwhile, an officer searching Young's office discovered a single .32 caliber Hertenberger bullet. A ballistics expert analyzed it and concluded that it had been fired from a Walther PPK self-loading pistol, the same type of firearm used to murder Harry and Nicola Fuller. The police questioned Young about the origin of his cash, to which he explained that a friend had given it to him 2 years earlier, and he had saved it for emergencies. Meanwhile, an officer searching Young's office found a single .32 caliber Hertenberger bullet. A ballistics expert examined it and determined that it had been fired from a Walther PPK self-loading pistol, the same type of weapon used in the murders of Harry and Nicola Fuller. To Nicola's family, Young was a total stranger, as her sister Michelle mentioned on Crime Watch. She found it hard to believe that their insurance broker could have access to firearms, let alone commit such a crime. It didn't align with the character or type of person one would expect from an insurance broker. But then again, what does a murderer look like? What kind of job do they have in the first week of May, 3 months after the murders? Harry and Nicola were interred in separate ceremonies that reflected their distinct personalities. Harry's was a grand affair, while Nicola's was simple and intimate. Nicola's funeral occurred the day after Harry's at the same church where they had celebrated their marriage just 8 months earlier. The officiating reverend remarked to the Canton Sussex Courier, "You cannot make sense of a nonsense like this. It is hard to do anything other than stand together in sorrow and sadness." Steve Young's trial for the double murder began in late February 1994, a little over a year after the deaths of Harry and Nicola. The prosecution's argument was relatively clear-cut. Although the evidence against Young was circumstantial, they asserted that his severe financial troubles motivated him to target Harry Fuller, who was known to carry significant amounts of cash. By arranging a meeting with Harry regarding his client's Porsche, Young created a plausible reason for being at the cottage. His access to firearms provided him with the means to commit the crime, and the discovery of bullets similar to those used in the murders established a connection. Additionally, his inconsistent accounts and false statements to police served as further evidence of his guilt. Nicola Fuller became a victim of collateral damage when Young shot her solely to prevent her from identifying him as the murderer of her husband. The defense completely contested this claim, arguing that if Young's only motivation was financial gain, there were numerous other individuals who could have targeted Harry Fuller for similar reasons, including his various enemies and disgruntled business partners. Furthermore, if Young was merely seeking a quick financial benefit, why didn't he just break into Blackman's cottage when no one was present? If Nicola wasn't a target, why didn't he arrange to meet Harry at another location or when he was by himself? The atmosphere in the courtroom was charged as Steve Young took the stand to defend himself. In an unexpected turn of events, he presented a completely new version of what happened on the morning of February 10th. For the first time, Young explained the 8:10 a.m. phone call between him and Harry Fuller, stating that he called Harry upon arriving at Blackman's cottage because all the curtains were drawn and there was no answer when he knocked on the door. The call seemed to have roused Harry from sleep. Harry asked Young to give him a moment, so Young waited in his car. After a short time, he noticed that a curtain had been drawn back and knocked again, but there was still no answer. He then walked around to the back of the property, thinking that Harry might be waiting for him in the parking area. Upon arrival, he found the back door slightly ajar. Peering inside, Young saw Harry lying on the floor and hurried in to check for a pulse, but there was none. Initially, he suspected a heart attack, However, he soon observed blood coming from Harry's head and spotted a cartridge case nearby. Drawing from his knowledge of firearms, Young identified it as a .32 caliber bullet casing. For the first time, Young acknowledged that he had previously owned a replica .32 Walther PPK pistol, which he claimed to have bought from a Chinese mail order 5 years earlier, but had since sold to another person. He stated that in the months leading up to Harry Fuller's death, he and another individual approached Young at his office, asking for assistance in helping Harry acquire a gun for protection. Young sold him the Walther PPK along with some of his reloaded ammunition. Upon learning of Harry's death, Young panicked and quickly left the premises. As he looked back at the house, he noticed an unfamiliar male face in the upstairs window. Young dialed 999 but hesitated. Harry Fuller had been murdered with the very weapon that Young had illegally sold him. Fearing he might be wrongly implicated in the crime or that his life could be at risk for being a witness, he made the tough choice to remain silent about what he witnessed. In the weeks that followed, Young reported receiving multiple threatening calls from an anonymous male directed at him and his family. His fear was so overwhelming that he felt the need to fabricate stories and maintain a facade of composure when interrogated by the police. The defense suggested that another one of Harry's adversaries might have entered the cottage that morning. It was possible that Harry had aimed his gun at the intruder, who then seized the weapon and used it to murder the couple. However, the prosecution countered this argument. If someone had gone to the Fullers' residence with the intent to kill, common sense would imply they would have brought their own firearm. Additionally, Harry had been shot from behind at close range. It was improbable that he would have turned away while a gun was pointed at him. Young's account of selling Harry his Walther PPK along with some reloaded ammunition appeared suspiciously convenient, especially since he only mentioned it after learning that .32 caliber ammunition had been found in his office. After 4 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated overnight before reaching a verdict regarding the murders of Harry and Nicola Fuller. Steve Young was found guilty and sentenced to 2 life terms. The atmosphere in the courtroom was mixed. Some of the victims' relatives cheered while Young's wife broke down in tears. While Nicholas's family felt a sense of relief, her father expressed to reporters that the verdict does not change their situation at all. They cannot bring Nikki back. However, this does remove a dangerous individual from society. Harry and Nicola's loved ones can finally start the healing process, but for one juror, the ordeal was just beginning. If you remember, back at the beginning of the video, we mentioned that this wasn't just another typical true crime case. This is the part of the story where things get a bit weird and, dare I say, spooky even? Pay close attention, folks. It's about to get even more interesting. For weeks following the trial, 24-year-old juror Adrian found himself lying awake at night, troubled by a secret. Something had occurred during the trial that left him feeling uneasy. He was conflicted about whether to keep it to himself or if others deserved to know the truth. After much internal debate, Adrian decided to seek legal counsel. However, most solicitors were reluctant to get involved, likely due to the illegality of disclosing anything jurors shared with them. As the weeks passed, Adrian found it increasingly difficult to cope with the knowledge of what had transpired behind closed doors. The night before the jury delivered its verdict on Steve Young, the 12 jurors had been sequestered in a hotel for deliberation. This is a common procedure in many countries, designed to limit jurors' access to the outside world and prevent any external influences or information from affecting their decision-making process. The jurors endured a lengthy 4 weeks. They were not only torn over whether Steve Young was being truthful, but also had to listen to a 6-minute recording of Nicola Fuller's unsuccessful attempt to seek help, which took an emotional toll on them. Once the jurors arrived at the hotel, they gathered for dinner and enjoyed a few drinks to help them relax. The atmosphere soon became more laid back, with people joking and engaging in lighthearted conversation, significantly improving the mood. An amusing discussion emerged about seances, and which among them had experienced one before. A seance is an assembly where individuals seek to connect with those who have passed away. The idea of reaching out to the deceased has existed for centuries, but it wasn't until the late 1800s that the first device designed to aid this communication was introduced. This device, known as a Ouija board, features a flat surface marked with all the letters of the alphabet, numbers from 0 to 9, and the words yes, no, and goodbye. At the bottom lies a small, heart-shaped piece called the planchette. To use a Ouija board, 2 or more individuals gather around it and lightly place their hands on the planchette. They then pose questions and observe as the planchette glides across the board, forming messages from the spirit world. The Ouija board is a topic of debate, with some people viewing it as a means to communicate with the spirit world, while others believe it to be a satanic tool that can open menacing portals into the unknown. We here at Graveyard Dance used to actually make them out of solid oak boards and sell them on our website. However, we became aware of something a few years ago that firmly changed our minds on ever selling them again. If you go to our website and listen to the story of the Elvin's vampire, there is a guy who tells us about his friends heading out there, and you'll hear what happened to him. Although we weren't there personally, we know 2 of the people who were and have become pretty good friends with one of them, and I doubt they would ever lie about something like that. We have also in the past had a large group of friends who traveled across the country in a van, checking out supposed haunted places and things like that, and to say we've seen some really scary and unexplainable stuff would be a huge understatement. What I am saying is, I for one totally believe that really strange things can come through a Ouija board, and I wouldn't recommend anyone to ever play with them. If you have one, burn it. Anywho, where was I? Oh yeah. The jurors chuckled and exchanged tales about their experiences with seances before heading to their rooms for the 11 p.m. curfew. Adrian, feeling quite tipsy, went straight to bed, but a small group consisting of 1 man and 3 women was not ready to end the night. Captivated by the discussion on seances, they convened in one of their hotel rooms and decided to conduct a seance of their own. They created their own Ouija board from paper, using a wine glass as the planchette. The 4 friends gathered around the board, each placing their fingers on the base of the glass. They inquired if any spirits were present and received a positive response. When they asked the spirit to reveal its identity, the planchette glided across the board, spelling out the name Harry Fuller. Feeling spooked yet? The atmosphere among the group became charged with tension. The appointed leader inquired about who was responsible for the death. They observed in silence as the wine glass glided across the table, ultimately forming the words, "Stephen Young did it." The leader then asked what actions they should take next. The reply was filled with guilt. Tomorrow. For some of the women, it became overwhelming, leading them to tears as they realized they had gone too far. The seance concluded, and the group retreated to their individual rooms, haunted by their actions. The following morning, Adrian overheard them discussing it during breakfast. He was astonished that they had actually proceeded with it. Initially, he found it amusing, but his amusement faded when Steve Young was pronounced guilty. Later that day, Adrian began to question whether justice had truly been served. For weeks after the trial, he could no longer bear the burden of his knowledge. He penned an anonymous letter to the Crown Court, outlining the events at the hotel and urging that Steve Young's conviction be overturned. Shortly thereafter, he contacted the News of the World tabloid to share his exclusive story, stating, "This is someone's life we're talking about." He was shocked that these adults had engaged in such childish behavior. The News of the World ran a story titled "Booze, Dirty Jokes, and the Ouija Board," which quickly turned into a media phenomenon. A jury is anticipated to deliver a verdict based solely on the evidence presented during the trial, rather than being influenced by potentially unreliable external information or attempts to gather additional evidence, which could constitute a criminal offense. Adrian's claims were taken very seriously, prompting a thorough investigation to ascertain whether those who conducted the seance had attempted to obstruct justice. The 4 jury members maintained that their choice to use the Ouija board was merely a misguided decision influenced by alcohol. Despite some emotional responses, they regarded the entire situation as a joke and firmly stated that the responses provided by the alleged spirit had no bearing on their verdict against Steve Young. After 6 months of inquiries and discussions, the court concluded that although the jury had acted improperly, no criminal activity had taken place. Steve Young's legal team appealed his conviction partly due to the jury's misconduct, and the court concurred, ordering a retrial. This decision sparked intriguing debates within the legal community. Law professor Gary Slapper addressed the matter in the Times, posing a hypothetical scenario. If jurors in a hotel had sought divine guidance through prayer, would that render their verdict invalid? They would ultimately be consulting something intangible and distinct from the evidence presented in the case. Both divine and superstitious oracles depend on the juror's faith. Can the Court of Appeal contend that seeking guidance from a deity is acceptable while prohibiting consultation with any other non-physical entity? Harry and Nicola's families were eager to leave the trauma of the trial behind and continue with their lives. However, when they learned that Young's conviction had been overturned, they felt cautious. Harry's family found it hard to accept that a man who had been proven guilty in court could receive a retrial based on what they considered to be such a silly reason. Meanwhile, Nicola's family doubted their ability to endure the process again. They were outraged that the media had seized upon the sensational Ouija board narrative, claiming that the jurors had completely disrespected their daughter's death. The retrial of Steve Young for the murders of Harry and Nicola Fuller took place 8 months later before an entirely new jury. For 3 weeks, the loved ones of Harry and Nicola had to endure the distressing evidence once more, but yet again, the jury unanimously convicted Steve Young for both murders. The judge labeled him a cold-blooded murderer who committed the offenses for his own benefit, subsequently sentencing him to 2 life terms. When given the opportunity to speak, Young simply replied, "I'm innocent, my lord." Outside the courthouse, Harry's brother Tom expressed to reporters that Stephen Young is a beast who deserves to be eliminated and advocated for the reinstatement of capital punishment for individuals like him. It is difficult to articulate the suffering both families have endured throughout this ordeal. It feels as if someone is reaching into your abdomen and gradually pulling out your insides. Many find it difficult to believe that a respectable family man like Steve Young could be driven to commit such a heartless act, regardless of the reasons behind it. Speculation persists that he was not alone at the Fullers' residence on February 10, 1993. The issue of the witnesses who claimed to have seen 2 enigmatic men near Blackman's cottage on the morning of the murders remained unresolved. Although these sightings were never substantiated, they fueled ongoing speculation that Steve Young might have been collaborating with one of Harry Fuller's adversaries, either under duress or due to financial need. Given Young's access to firearms, his clean criminal record, and his relationship with Harry, he could be seen as an appealing accomplice for anyone wishing to inflict greater harm on Harry than merely robbing him. There was even a theory suggesting that Young may have agreed to facilitate the meeting without being aware of the impending events. However, no evidence was ever found to substantiate this claim, and no additional individuals were charged in connection with the crime. The trial of Steve Young has become a notable case of juror misconduct. Even decades later, the actions of the jurors remain under scrutiny. Tom Fuller, brother of Harry Fuller, believes that the original jurors should face consequences for their actions, stating that their behavior caused prolonged suffering for everyone involved. Detective Graham Hill, who participated in the investigation of the Fuller murder, expressed to ABC that this situation is a complete mockery and represents one of the most serious types of trials imaginable. He emphasized that there is nothing humorous or trivial about it, yet those 4 jurors turned it into a farce. University of Melbourne law professor Jeremy Gans authored a book focused on the case known as the Ouija board jurors mystery, subtitled Mischief and Misery in the Jury System. In this work, he examines various instances of jury misconduct and concludes that the Ouija board jurors were not particularly unique aside from the sensational media coverage. This challenges the common belief that these jurors trivialized the Fuller case and treated their sequestering at a hotel like a social event. Instead, Gans emphasizes that they were subjected to distressing evidence, including Nicola's unsuccessful 999 call, which would have been profoundly traumatic. Professor Gans informed ABC that whatever transpired in that hotel room likely wasn't a pleasant experience for the jury, but perhaps they were dealing with something else. Gans' book also revealed that in 2004, Young's new defense team engaged a forensic audiologist to examine the 6-minute recording of the 999 call made by Nicola Fuller. They found that after Nicola's death, The sounds of two different individuals could be heard searching through a black man's cottage and whispering to each other. Although the whispers were mostly indecipherable, one word was distinctly audible. The stress from Nicola's passing and the ongoing legal battle significantly impacted her parents, Barbara and Michael, both in their mid-50s. Within 2 years of the legal proceedings, Barbara experienced a heart attack while Michael suffered a serious stroke. They recently felt the absence of Nicola. Small things reminded her of Nicola, from her favorite songs to the way she would always seek out any patch of sunlight. Barbara shared with Crime Watch that when she sits in her garden under the sun, she feels as if she can see Nicola in the lounger that Michelle, Nicola's sister, took care of for their parents while also coping with her own sorrow. Michelle was plagued by nightmares about her sister's last moments and told Crime Watch that the image of Nicola crawling to the phone for help that never arrived kept her awake at night. She expressed that at least 100 times a day, she wants to call Nikki or thinks about sharing something with her, but she struggles to accept that Nicola is gone. Michelle believes that one day she will see her sister again and find strength in the hope of being able to ask how she is doing. With only a couple weeks left till Halloween, we decided to bring you a story with a spooky twist. We did another one back about a year ago, or so that was eerily similar to this one. It was about a young lady in Arkansas, if I remember correctly, who was murdered by her new husband, and her ghost came back to tell her mother what had happened to her, and sure enough, when they went and did the autopsy, what her mother said her daughter's ghost told her about her murder matched with what they found on her body. Just goes to show you that no bad deed will ever go unpunished. You may get away with it for a little while, but the truth will always come out, whether it be on this side of life or the next. Don't forget to actually go to our website. There you can pick the topics that you want to hear about. True crime, check. Ghosts and hauntings, check. Little green men in flying saucers who come to Earth to probe us, yeah, we have those cases too. If you like what we do, please do this for me as a personal favor. Hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. It means so much to our growing channel. We'd like to actually get monetized this year, hopefully, and we can't do that without your help. Thanks again everyone for watching, listening, and most of all, for caring enough to be a part of the Graveyard Dance family. Till next time, thanks for watching.